Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. It's a mailbag episode. We're going to answer a lot of your questions, including one that's about a Bud Dupree update and lots of draft questions and maybe some more questions about free agency. Lots to discuss here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app and especially on YouTube. Like this video if you see it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes because we bring your team every day. And we hope that we are first listen every day. Today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started, especially betting on all the other games and all the other leagues right now. But a little bit of Steelers news is now the update that they have now released Jamir Jones, who was a guy that they signed back right around the time of the combine. Jamir Jones had kind of progressed to their third outside linebacker last year, kind of taking the place of Malik Reed, and as far as being an option. But it's clear the Steelers want to make sure that their backup edge rushers are not as significant of a downgrade from their starters in TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. And that now brings us back to the question, what's the plan there and what's up with Bud Dupree? We're going to do a lot of mailbag questions today because you guys have been sending them in like crazy, and we're going to try to knock a lot of them out. Here's our friend Bruce Ross, all the way from Mississippi, asking about Bud Dupree.
Hey, how you doing, Chris? This is Bruce Ross calling in from Cleveland, Mississippi. Man, I'm just calling to see what is the holdup with Bud Dupree. We heard he went to visit the Steelers. We haven't heard anything to my knowledge. So is this a sign that we're not going to get Bud, or is this like normal, or what do you think? So I'm just trying to see what's up with Bud because, like I said, it's been a while since we heard any news. Thank you, man.
Thank you, Bruce, for your question. And remember, if you want to be on the call line or get to the call line, all you got to do is call 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question to under a minute, and we'll get your answer on your question on the show. So, Bruce, let me give you just a little bit of perspective from my end, just what I think is happening here with the Bud Dupree situation. I particularly believe that Bud Dupree, there's a mutual interest of that to happen, but Bud Dupree wants to see if he can make real money. And we've talked about this with Alan Saunders on the show before, but Bud Dupree's still a free agent. He's probably only got like a couple more years of making real deal edge rusher money. And he got a good payday from the Titans, but now he's not able to fully live out that contract because they've let him go. So now he's looking for the next big thing. The Steelers aren't going to pay him big money. They're going to pay him, a small amount of money with probably a 1 or 2 year deal maximum and then string him along like that. Bud Dupree's not looking for that. But what he could be looking for is an opportunity to showcase that he is still a guy that's worthy of a bigger contract when he like the way he did before he left the Steelers with the numbers that he was putting up for Pittsburgh back then. So I think the biggest thing is that Bud Dupree is looking for the deal. And he wants to make sure that there's not a chance somewhere where he could start and show it in a more full capacity. Because even if he does get to play for the Steelers and he does do well for them, he'll still be a backup, and that might not be the role he wants to portray out to GMs and executives out there when he hits free agency again over the next couple of years or so. So I think that's the big holdup. He's just holding out, trying to see things. I think the Steelers want it to happen. I think he's okay with it happening, but he just wants to make sure he wants to make sure that he has exhausted all of his options leading up to that. So I don't think it's anything nefarious or anything like that. It's just, hey, Bud Dupree's trying to get paid. Steelers ain't trying to pay him that much, and he's looking for other answers before he says yes. Now, I'm not so sure the releasing of Jamir Jones signals that Bud Dupree is imminent or anything like that. I think that might be more so maybe Jamir Jones had a health issue that they didn't know about, there was an injury or something. there's a lot of reasons that can happen. Guys who have been practice squad guys, and those guys get cut all the time and moved around the NFL is can be gruesome to when it comes to that part of the business there. But I still think that Bud Dupree isn't out of the question. I think that it's something that they're certainly considering and could even consider after the NFL draft is over. Bud Dupree, he's had a lot of injuries in his career. Maybe he's healing from one right now, just making sure that he's good to go. So lots of different things that could be in the way there. But Bud Dupree, I do think, isn't out of the picture just yet. We have a lot of questions from you guys, so we're going to keep it rolling here with another linebacker question. We touched on linebackers a bit yesterday, but this question I thought was interesting. It comes from our friend Solomon in New Jersey. Here's that.
Hey, Chris. This is Suleiman from New Jersey. I know you had talked about Jack Campbell as a potential inside linebacker that the Steelers can draft, and he's one of your favorites, but I wanted to get your thoughts on Trenton Simpson from Clemson. He seems to be a guy that can line up inside, outside, play deep. I feel like he could be a great asset, and he can be used all over the field. Just wanted to get your thoughts on him, and if you think he would be a good selection for the Steelers' second pick. Thanks for taking my call, and keep up the great work.
Thank you for your question, Solomon. I want to get to Trenton Simpson because I want to make it clear. I like him a lot, too. Jack Campbell is just the guy who I think his instincts are the farthest along as far as this year's linebacker class, and he could be the guy that kind of fits in there and is a plug-and-play guy that where you could put him in with Cole Holcomb and with Landon Roberts and have him kind of just fit in. I think in the long term he would be a good kind of captain-like player in the middle part of the field. I think Trenton Simpson is probably the best athlete at linebacker this year. He ran a 4.43 in his 40-yard dash. He's 6'2", 235, so he's good size, good speed. He can get around pretty well. I think that he does pretty well when you match him with a running back out of the backfield, and he kind of just has to jump on a guy and kind of keep close to them. All those measurables work out. Jack Campbell, because I think that he's going to be the first linebacker off the board this year as far as off-ball, inside linebacker type guys. I think that he might, if you want to avoid spending on a linebacker in the early part of the second round, like maybe 32, I doubt he gets to 49. If he does, I think that's a great pick for the Steelers. But if you can't take him there, I think that's where you get a chance to get a Trenton Simpson, maybe at 49 or even 80, depending on how far he falls, because there's a mixed bag. Some people think he's a mid-round 2. Some people think he's a mid-round 3. But certainly I think the Steelers are in a position to get either one of those guys and add a young linebacker to what's right now a veteran linebacker room, plus Mark Robinson. They still need another presence there, and I think it would be a good chance to get a good athlete. So personally, I say Jack Campbell, but Trenton Simpson's my number 2, even over Drew Sanders. I think that Trenton Simpson would be an interesting addition as far as the coverage guys. Both Cole Holcomb and Landon Roberts are like more run stuffers. Cole Holcomb a little bit better at coverage. Trenton Simpson would probably be your best coverage option if you brought him in at linebacker, and could be an interesting swap in there because as we were talking about with Alan Saunders just yesterday on the Locked On Steelers podcast, the role of a traditional linebacker is reduced in today's NFL with all the passing that there is. Now, as I've talked about before, the increase of teams starting to run the ball more, you're going to still want to keep linebackers around. And I think their relevance is going to kind of rise back up soon, but you still need guys who can cover and who can play the run. I think that Jack Campbell would be better suited for both roles, but I think Trenton Simpson could be the better athlete between the two, if that makes sense what I'm spinning there. So 1A, 1B for me. I think that either one would be fine if they got either one of them on day 2 of the draft. And the Steelers linebacker room would look kind of healthy for me. But we got a lot more questions to get to. We'll get to all of them right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, before we do any of that, I want to talk to you guys about our great sponsors at Built Bar. And of course, Built Bar is the #1 protein bar in America because they're healthy, and they taste amazing. And when I say amazing, I mean it. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. They come in so many different flavors, and that's what makes them awesome. They come in all these different flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream. And I'm not sure how they do it, but somehow they pack all these in. They only pack in 130 calories, but they and only have 4 grams of sugar, but somehow pack a whopping 17 grams of protein into each Built bar. That's an awesome opportunity for you to go get your own. Now you don't even need to wait to get the box. You used to have to email Built Bar, go to their website and buy them. Now you can buy them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club, where you can still get your specialty flavors delivered at built.com. That's right. Head to your local Walmart today, and you can walk to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars by picking up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate bar, or coconut puff. Or if you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with all of their hit flavors, brownie batter puff and churro puff. Trust me, when you try Built Bar, you'll thank me later, because you're trying the best protein bar in the world. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're going to continue running through our mailbag questions here today, and we have a lot of ones that are focused on the NFL draft. But before we get back to the NFL draft, let's look at a free agency question here that we have from our friend Will, who has a question about a player who's still on the Steelers roster and whether or not they should get rid of them and move forward. Here's Will.
Good morning, Chris. My name is Will, regular listener. Question about something that's kind of gone under the radar during Omar Khan's signature off season here. What do you think he's going to do with the Mitch Trubisky situation? Obviously, we can't go into the season with a $10 million backup. I understand that he's handsome and dynamic and helpful, and the Rooneys have a man crush on him, but he's a $2 million re-signee if possible, and if he wants to start somewhere else, we need to let him go and sign Rudolph.
Thank you for your question, Will. So one thing I think it's important to look at, yes, Mitch Trubisky is a $10.6 million cap hit for the Pittsburgh Steelers this year, and that's a big number for a backup quarterback. Mason Rudolph is still a free agent. No one signed him yet, so there's certainly those guys out there right now. But I think it's important to remember, I don't think it's necessarily going overlooked, because we did talk about the potential of letting go Mitch Trubisky at the start of free agency, because it would have freed up $8 million. But something that's been brought up and does make sense is that if you let go of Mitch Trubisky at $8 million, you're probably going to spend another $4 or $6 million on backup quarterbacks to replace him. And the Steelers still only have 2 quarterbacks on the roster. I actually even think a 7th-round quarterback this year, kind of like how they did with Oladikin last year, it would even be likely for the Steelers to kind of just bring in a guy, have them be the 3rd-string quarterback in emergency situations, and keep Trubisky around. Yes, $10.6 million is a lot of money for a backup quarterback, but when you have a quarterback on a rookie deal, and Kenny Pickett's dealt with a couple injuries in his first year, I think this is kind of their breaking case of emergency situation where they're keeping him around. And again, necessarily, if you let him go, you're getting $8 million back, but you're spending at least half, probably more, in filling those spots. And I don't think it's going to be easy just to get a $2 million backup. When guys like Sam Darnold, Drew Lock, Jameis Winston, all those guys are making over $4 million a year in their backups as well. And you could finagle something like Gardner Minshew for the Colts is making like $3.5 million, but those guys are gone. I think the ship has sailed on Mitch Trubisky being gone for the Steelers this year. I think that they're happy to keep him around just for another year. We've seen it. They've made their free agent moves this year. They've made quite a few signings, and I think a lot of people feel confident about their signings this year without even having to let go of Mitch Trubisky. So I think that's a really interesting situation that they have and that they've set up for themselves without having to let go of a guy who is their 2nd most expensive offensive cap. No, excuse me, 3rd most expensive. Oh no, 4th most. I take it back because I did not account for some accruing contracts. Deontay Johnson has the highest cap hit on the offense at $16.3 million. Chukwuma Okorafor at 13 million, and then James Daniels at 11.1, and then it's Mitch Trubisky at 10.6 as far as a cap hit this year. And who knows, maybe Mitch Trubisky, maybe he does want to start somewhere and move on with his career. But I think that right now he was a backup for the Buffalo Bills. He knows what the deal is with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think maybe he might be looking for either a situation to go start somewhere if he gets the opportunity after he's done with the Pittsburgh Steelers, or maybe he's looking at a situation where, you know what, it wouldn't be bad to make a few $1 million a year and not get my body beat up if I know that I'm not going to be a full-time starting quarterback in the NFL. But I think Mitch Trubisky is competitive. Eventually he'll get there. But this year, I think the Steelers are going to be happy to have an experienced veteran backup for in case Kenny Pickett goes down with another injury this season. All right, now let's get back to some draft questions here. Thank you again for Will. And again, if you want to call in and get your questions in, it's 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, and we'll get to your question. Here's my man, Big Nathan Glass out of Los Angeles. He's got a draft question that's about trading down, but if a certain team comes calling, here, I'll let Nate tell you what his question is.
How you doing, Chris? Nathan Glass, California. My question is about Broderick Jones. If he's available at number 17, but I know you have also entertained the thought of trading down. So if, for example, let's just say Kansas City Chiefs, they lost Orlando Brown Jr. in free agency. So if the Kansas City Chiefs came calling for that number 17th pick where Broderick Jones is still there, do you draft Broderick Jones or do you trade down? What would you do? Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks for making the call, Nate. I appreciate the question as always. Personally, I'm a fan of when you get your guy, you sprint to the podium and you take them unless someone offers you the most ridiculous deal in the world to get them. And when I mean ridiculous, it would have to be over the top. So let's look at it this way. The Steelers are sitting at 17th overall. The Kansas City Chiefs are sitting at 31st overall. The Chiefs could, if they wanted to trade up and go get the Steelers picks, they need to throw in some serious consideration. I don't think that their second round pick would be enough to do that. So if you're in that situation and they're that hungry, I think, and this is part of why, when we talk about the trade values chart that we use on this show, it's something that I've talked about as far as, being something that's helpful and useful. It's not the Bible. It's just something that we kind of use to help, I guess not monetize, but quantify what picks have different values. If you look at the value chart as far as this, it would require more than just a second round pick. But the reason it kind of goes out the window sometimes is that some of these trades, especially on draft day, can be very volatile to just the temperament of the situation. Let's say Broderick Jones does fall to 17, and let's say Kansas City gets on the phone and Omar Khan's on the phone with him. Like, you know what? We love Broderick Jones. Like, personally, Broderick Jones, if I'm trading up to 12 or 9 or wherever the Steelers are, Broderick Jones is my guy. Like, I'd even be willing to trade up to Broderick Jones. If he falls to 17 and I'm the GM, Chris Carter is sprinting to the podium, picking Broderick Jones and throwing a party back in Pittsburgh. But I think that there is I think that you have to always leave room in for if Kansas City calls and say, hey, man, that is our guy. And they did lose Orlando Brown. But if they say, hey, man, that's our guy, we absolutely want him. That's where Omar Khan, if he was so willing, he'd be like, you know what? Let's drive up the price. How much you want for him? And I don't doubt that that's what he did to the Chicago Bears for Chase Claypool. I bet you that there were a few teams in the mix to get him, and the Bears just jumped the highest. And that's what's going to happen. And there might be other teams that want to trade up and get him, not just the Kansas City Chiefs. But if the Chiefs came a calling, I think that the only way I even entertain it if they gave me your first, second, and third round picks, because I think that Broderick Jones can be that good of a player. I think he can be a pillar offensive tackle player. And here's the thing, though. They give you your first, second, and third round picks there. You get the 31st pick that's at the end of the first round and the 32nd pick that you still have from Chicago. Then you have basically 3 second round picks and 2 third round picks, and you can still kind of get aggressive with how you want to play around with there. But again, if it's me though, I'm not even entertaining it unless it's a ridiculous offer. I think that it's got to be something it's got to be something crazy that no one would normally offer, because Broderick Jones, I think, could be that guy that fixes the Steelers' offensive line for the long term and may even be the pillar piece of what people have started to call the picket fence. All right, we're going to take one more break. When we come back, I'm going to finish answering all these different questions we've lined up. Got a lot more in store. Stay tuned right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're going to get to some more draft questions here because a lot of people have been asking as far as the best fits for different things. Let's get to some questions here that I think could be really interesting as far as fitting. This is a specific question that involves two bigger guys in the NFL draft that are going to come in later rounds. Here's Troy Blessing from Macungie, Pennsylvania, asking his question.
Hi, Chris. Love the show. My name is Troy Blessing from Macungie, Pennsylvania. I am calling in regards of a question about Carter Warren, offensive tackle from Pitt, and what your thoughts on him are, and also Kobe Warren from Auburn, a defensive tackle. I love the show. Keep it up. Bye.
Thank you very much for your question, Troy. Now, just to be clear, I believe you meant Kobe Wooden, the defensive tackle from Auburn. But let me first address Carter Warren, because I've covered Carter Warren. I've talked to him, and he's a really great guy. But I like Carter Warren as an offensive tackle, but he is fourth round in my opinion. He's coming off of an ACL injury. He's healthy. Like, I saw him in his pro day. He's doing just fine. I've talked to Carter Warren. I think he'd be a good player. But the Steelers need a pillar offensive tackle, not just a guy who's going to kind of fall into the middle rounds. I think that if they got him in the fourth round, they'd probably be doing it as a doubling down on the tackle position, and I'm not sure that they're going to do that in this draft class with all the other needs that they have this year. I just think that with the picks the Steelers have right now, I'm not so sure Carter Warren is going to fit into the picture there. But who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they see Carter Warren as the next big thing, and they draft him in the third round or something like that. And that's like their secret offensive tackle move to kind of secure the offensive line, or they even draft them for depth because they say, you know what, all we have is really Raven Clark, who we just signed. Let's bring in a guy who we've kind of been, watching practice for the last 4 or 5 years that he's been a Pitt Panther. I like Carter Warren, good player, not someone though that I think that you would draft with the hope that he'd be a plug-and-play starter right now that would take over for Dan Moore Jr. and be your left tackle for the next decade or so. But the other guy, Colby Wooden's an interesting prospect because he came in, like, I think at 273 or something like that in the NFL at the NFL Combine. I'm not going to lie and tell you that I've studied Colby Wooden tape up and down because I haven't. But from what I have like just gathered from the notes that I've seen, and just a couple things that I watched on him, he has interesting traits. He can be a good pass rusher on the inside, but he looks more like he could be a tweener between edge and interior defensive line. A guy though that I'm looking at maybe in the fourth round, and that could be a good thing to have if you don't hit on a bigger defensive lineman in your first 4 picks in the first 3 rounds. Maybe that fourth pick at 120, that's where you go get a guy like this, but not jumping out of my chair for him either in this equation. I think there's other guys that would be better suited for that situation. All right, let's get to a couple more questions here. And these kind of questions actually bounce off of each other a bit. Let's lead with our friend Miguel from Canada, who's asking about the secondary.
Hey, Chris, it's Miguel from Canada. I was just wondering, how we talked about the Steelers maybe double dipping at corner? Do you think that could be Brian Branch and Keely Ringo? Because they're both different types. Keely Ringo's more on the outside. Brian Branch is more of a safety slot guy. And I think that would make a good pair if you got Brian Branch at 17 and then maybe Keely Ringo falls to 49. Or maybe you even trade back from 32 and get him a bit later in the second round. Just let me know what you think. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much for your question, Miguel. What do I think about the proposition of trading for getting Keely Ringo and Brian Branch? For one, I like Brian Branch. I think that he has a lot of good instincts. I'm not so sure I'd take him at 17. I think that if you're taking at 17, it means that Joey Porter Jr., Christian Gonzalez, and Devin Witherspoon are all gone, as well as all the top 3 offensive tackles. And I just think that instead of getting him, you might be able to trade down and get some more of those picks so that you can get a Kelly Ringo in the second round or something at the proper value. But the proposition is certainly worthwhile to explore. I think Brian Branch could be a good slot guy who helps you in the middle part of the field, gives you kind of an on-field young captain-like figure who can grow into grow chemistry with Minka Fitzpatrick. That could certainly be something that you look at for a while. Kelly Ringo, though, is an interesting proposition because this is a guy who's 6'2", 207, and ran a sub 4.4 40-yard dash. He presses really well. He's not always the most technically sound, but he has a lot of tools in his bag that I think could really work out for him. I just think that he has to still sharpen a bit of his play and how he does before he'd be a top pick for the Steelers. And I think that's fine. But, something that Alan, Saunders has brought up on this show, maybe don't get the cornerback that needs more coaching up as much because the Steelers haven't had much success there. Granted, this is a different Steelers front office, and Terrell Austin's now the defensive coordinator, so maybe that won't be as much of an issue. Personally, I think if you're getting that cornerback in that range, the guy you go get is Julius Brents. Now, yes, he's slower, ran a 4.53, but that man's technique is right in there. He has the right height. I think he's like 6'3". He's really good at mirroring opponents. I think that he would be my ideal cornerback for that situation if you wanted to go outside while also getting an inside guy like Brian Branch. But there's another caller who called in with a similar question, but a different approach in how to get your 2 guys in the secondary in the NFL draft. Here's Jefferson McNeil, all the way from Cincinnati.
Hey, Chris, it's Jefferson McNeil, long-time listener here from Cincinnati, Ohio. I had a question for you. So you've talked about double dipping that corner for a while now. Hey, usually whenever you talk about it, you bring up getting a slot corner and outside corner. But the way the board could potentially shake out, what if, Deontay Banks is the best guy on the board come 17, right? Or maybe Joey Porter Jr. does fall to the Steelers. But then come pick 49, a guy floating around, best guy on the board for the Steelers is Keely Ringo. Do you think they could potentially put together double up at corner and get 2 outside guys, a really high potential guy in Keely Ringo, have questions about him, but then get a guy to come out the gate and play pretty solid for him and Deontay Banks or Joey Porter Jr. early? Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who called into the call line because it's always great to answer your questions and interact with you guys. But let's address this. So yeah, sure, double dipping at corner, something that I've advocated a lot for. I think that it's very likely that there is a position to be double dipped. It is the cornerback spot, whether it is a slot and an outside guy or 2 outside guys. The only reason I struggle to say it will be 2 outside guys is because I think the Steelers, they see Patrick Peterson, they see Akella Witherspoon, and they see Levi Wallace. And if you drafted 2 outside guys, that means someone that you either drafted this year in the upper rounds or someone that you're paying decent money isn't going to play, which means sure, they'd be fine. Like, if Akella Witherspoon doesn't work out again, whatever, you move on from that. But I think that they'd like the versatility there. And they might even go for a player who could play inside or outside. They might go for a person who might be able to flip around there, maybe a Garrett Williams type out of Syracuse, and having guys who are comfortable playing in the slot and playing on the outside, kind of like how Cam Sutton was. But I don't think they turned down entirely the idea of getting 2 young cornerbacks. They have 3 older cornerbacks right now. And Patrick Peterson, we know, is only going to be around for about 2 years. You can be excited about him this year. Then we'll see how he looks progressing into the next. Levi Wallace, I thought, did a stand-up job last year. And Akella Witherspoon, we know he can be hot and cold with the Steelers, and lately he was cold, but there was a time when he was hot, so maybe he'll get hot again. And maybe behind those guys, you want to get cornerbacks. Another cornerback I think would be interesting to get later in the draft, Riley Moss. I think that he's another guy that could really fit in there. A guy from Iowa, 6'1", runs a 4.45, decent athlete. I think that there's definitely space to make those types of moves in this NFL draft. But again, how much do you want to get the same type of player versus two different types of players that you can use? Because again, if you're getting a slot corner, you're getting a guy like, maybe you get Clark Phillips out of Utah, and you'd be getting a guy that can play a unique position that is important to the Steelers defense and covering over the middle and taking away those guys there. But getting an outside corner who can learn behind Patrick Peterson and those guys, you mix up the versatility that you have, and let's say, in a couple of years' time when Patrick Peterson retires and maybe Akella Witherspoon and Levi Wallace, their contracts run out and you don't feel like paying them anymore. Now you got two guys that play each of those positions who have been experienced on your roster. Granted, you could also have two guys on the outside. I'm not dismissing the idea. That's why I wanted to take your question, Jefferson. But I think that it might be best to have one at each in that situation. But again, wouldn't turn it away if the right value is there. I think the Steelers, again, have truly put themselves in a position where they can look at the draft and say, you know what, we're taking the best player out there because we've solidified our roster and we don't have as many weak spots as we did going into free agency. And that allows the Steelers to say, you know what? So what if we're doubling up at cornerback? We're getting the two best guys out there at each of those positions that we picked, and that's going to work out for us. So if that's the Steelers' mindset, I think that they could very much go along with that and make that happen. But there's a lot of time. There's a lot of talk that we could still go over as far as these other prospects that they could be looking at, but not as much time. As now, it is April 13th, which means the NFL draft starts in just 2 weeks. We'll get to more on that tomorrow and all the things happening with your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. You can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can also read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I cover all things Pitt athletics. If you want to check that out, go to post-gazette.com. And also listen to the North Shore Drive podcast that I do there Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. But also find me on the Locked On Steelers podcast right here on your favorite podcasting app, and especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily episodes. And if you want to help us out even further, go on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment. You do both at the same time. You get a special shout out at the end of the show. Like this person, we have the Berg 0920 who says, great podcast. I love this podcast. Listen to it every morning to get my Steelers fix. Chris Carter is my favorite, very knowledgeable about what's going on with the black and gold. Best Steelers podcast I've listened to. Thank you, Berg. Appreciate you very much for the review and the 5-star review. If you want your shout out, give you a 5-star review, and I will be sure to read it here on the show. Thanks again, everybody. Back tomorrow with the Friday edition of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Hope you have a great Thursday. We'll see you then.